Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this week I am delighted once again to be joined by David Lowe. David Lowe, welcome back to Barra's Art and Design. You've already had your testimonial, so you can't have a second one.
Is that 10? Like 10 in a row?
At least.
I did it and Celtic didn't.
At least.
There you go.
Well, 10 in a row at the moment seems like a distant hope, but hopefully we can stabilise and move on from the last few weeks. Okay. What have you made of it all, David?
Well, it's not pleasant to watch, to read, but it's been a long time coming. I mean, there's been a lot going on that's really not very appetising, and I think, you know, with the lack of activity in that transfer market, you know, that may well be the straw that broke the camel's back, because everybody is get nothing good to say about the board, and that statement they put out was laughable. So it's not good, it's not pleasant, because you want Celtic to be, when you think of Celtic, you want it to be positive, and you want to think of winning games and getting 3 points and playing in the Champions League. So it's pretty horrible just now.
I think unity is a massive factor, and in his first tenure at Celtic, Brendan spoke about the Holy Trinity. It doesn't feel as though that's there at the minute, David, and there'll be a blow-by-blow as to what's happened and where we can go from here. But you mentioned the transfer window, right? I felt that the tone of that statement was almost as if normal fans, normal punters, don't understand this level of finance. You don't understand how difficult it is to sign players, and you don't understand UEFA regulations. It was patronising in that respect, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I don't think Celtic and the board are any different in thinking that way. I mean, collectively, we'll all have friends that are football managers or ex-football players, and you can shoot the breeze in the pub. When it comes down to the nitty-gritty, they'll say you don't know what you're talking about because you never played the game. So that's the default position. They're all like that. Even your mates are like that. Mm-hmm. The boards are like that as well. As far as the board's concerned, and when I say the board, Celtic, it's not just Celtic. The board's default position is, a football board's default position is always, everybody's got an opinion on everything, and everybody doesn't realise how difficult it is. So, you know, running a football club can be quite combustible. But you're right, a successful football club, whether it's a little one or a big one like Celtic, requires that, to use your word, the Holy Trinity, to be running in sync, if that's a crazy metaphor. You know, if any one of them's not working, the whole thing's not working. This is what happened in COVID year. You know, we had a faction of players. So nobody was really responsible in isolation for COVID year. It's a bit of the board, a bit of the players, and a bit of the manager. But basically, you see what happens when everybody's not all for one and one for all. You know, performance just disappears off a cliff. And I think the same thing is looking like happening just now. It's not quite as bad as the COVID year, but, you know, clearly the manager and the board are not in tandem. The players, it remains to be seen. There were 3 stinking games. Is it 3 games in a row we ain't even scored? When was the last time that happened? Can't remember.
3 scoreless draws. When we're talking about that being in sync between the board and the manager, you've worked for businesses all your life, you've ran businesses your whole life as well, David. How can that, or can that be resolved? That's a big issue for me, because the COVID thing, we've spoken about this before, and it was pre the statement coming out. There was a feeling that things might collapse, and with more and more failing in the transfer window, failing in the Champions League, failing to communicate effectively with your fan base, you feel as though it is closing in. About how can it be resolved, do you think?
Well, it's a difficult one if we're talking specifically about Celtic. Clearly, and I mean clearly, the relationship between the manager and the board is fractured. Maybe it's not broken, but it's fractured. And Brendan Rodgers made a passing comment in one of his interviews in the last 2 or 3 weeks, where he talked about, if you're looking for a care and maintenance manager, that ain't me. I'm basically looking to improve things all the time, to progress all the time, to get better all the time. I thought that is the most telling statement that's come out of this whole football imbroglio since it became a problem.
Yeah.
Because Brendan Rodgers has got a point. And if you look at Celtic's track record in this space, I'll call it this century because it's 25 years. It's like history's repeating itself. Since the start of this century, or since the start of this board, this complexion of this board is being in control, we had, what, half a dozen managers. Now, only 2 of them we were lucky to have, if the truth be told. Martin O'Neill and Brendan twice. The others were lucky to get the job, grateful for having the job. But as far as I'm concerned, Martin O'Neill was run to the top of the hill, wants to improve, but what do? We downsize, we don't improve. You know, all the high earners, admittedly, but the very good players gradually over a few years left to be replaced by the best of the domestics. You know, your Barry Robsons, Three Hearts players, Willow Flood as well, God bless them, you know, etc. So that's like taking you up to the top of the hill, but taking you down again. And Celtic only seem to react on the park when there's a crisis. Celtic board I'm talking about. It's a crisis. So after we sort of meander along, you know, winning things in the domestically, crowds start to dwindle, you know, Ronnie Dahlia and Lenny a couple of times. It didn't really matter how good these guys were. You need to re-energize, so you bring in a big marquee manager like Brendan, you give him some money, and again, what does he do? He takes you up the hill. But what's supposed to happen next in football is you got to feed the beast. You know, you got to give him more money to improve the squad, because he ain't that care and maintenance guy I talked about. And again, relationship in that instance breaks down. He goes his separate ways and does his thing in a couple of teams down south. We meander along, and again, he comes back. Ange, you know, we messed about this time last year, remember, with that Newcastle guy, I forgot his name.
Eddie Howe.
Yeah. And then we won a watch with Ange. You know, that was like a bit of good luck. That wasn't anybody being clever. That was like, he was the right guy in the right place at the right time. And then he's only going to go, because he was so successful, he was always going to get poached. But I suspect he wanted to take it to the next level, and that didn't happen. And that was an element in why he left. An element, not probably the main reason. Then Brendan's back. He's probably getting promises. I'll be different this time, pal. You know. So Brendan arrives. He does his thing. We're supposed to improve. We've got all that money and even more money. I mean, the figures will be out imminently unless they delay it. And they're always usually out in September, showing the financial performance to the end of June 2025. And that was almost certainly show even more money. I mean, is there another club in the world, you know, that's got that amount of money sitting doing nothing, earning 2% or something? At least put some of it in Bitcoin or something if you don't want to put it in the squad. So really, when you look at it, it's not that surprising, really, that there was going to be a fracture when it's evident that the players ain't coming in. Now, whether that's incompetence, whether that's parsimony, whether that's whatever you want to call it, the net result is that we get beaten by a Diddy team and we're missing out, whatever the number is, 40 or 50 million pounds. And you know what? The buck only stops in one place, and that's at the board level. And it's entirely appropriate that the fans are pissed off and the fans have taken the actions that they've taken. How it ends up is another matter altogether. I don't know that. I don't know how that will end up, how this dissatisfaction with the board will manifest in the months ahead. It might dissipate if we start winning games domestically, win a couple in Europe. It might all fade away because that's the board's attitude. What have you got to complain about? You know, we've won this, we've won that, trebles, quadruple trebles, all that. We're kings of this tiny little castle and nobody cares about the Scottish League. So who knows how it'll unfold? I certainly don't know.
Your trend, where you're talking about leading us up to bring us back down, another element of that, I think, under Neil Lennon was when, you know, the famous Barcelona victory, but that leads us to the last 16 in the Champions League, and Juventus beat us over 2 legs. But then what happens is a dismantling, David, of that team. You know, we sell the star players. Forster goes, Ledley goes, Wanyama, Gary Hooper. So we have got that. That's what we do. You know, experience will tell you that's what we do.
But it's not quite as simple as that, because you've got to remember all of these people, right back to your Wanyamas and your Joe Ledleys, your Gary Hoopers. They're not here for a career. They're here to earn money in a short career and progress to the big leagues. And just about everybody of any consequence that comes to the Scottish League, irrespective of who they play for, is angling for a move to a bigger league, which comes with more money. I mean, it happened with Cadet and Hoydonk and Di Canio, and the list is endless. Even Lou McCarry did it, Ken DeVries did it. You know, it's a short career. You got to earn the money. An injury takes you out the game. So I get that, but everybody is just passing through. So that in itself needs to be managed, because if you don't manage it properly, it's like 4 corporation buses all arriving at the same time. That's like a third of the team or a quarter of the squad. And I think that's what happened with the French boys in the COVID year.
Yeah.
That's part of the management gig, is to manage the players' expectations when they want to go away. Who can go, who can stay, or if you're staying, you'll be next. You know, you've got to manage it. It's a bit of that going on with Maida, or Dyson Maida just now.
Yeah.
So I don't feel bad about Maida wanting away, because he's here. He's done well for us. It's time to move on. He's in his late 20s. He's got one big move left in him, and he wants us to prove himself at this stage. And whether they realise they're doing it or not, using him as an example, his performance has dipped because he's probably unhappy. So maybe it's psychological. I don't know.
I agree with you though.
So there's some defence of the players. They're passing through, and you can't keep players. The point is, you can't keep players that want away.
Beyond that point. And I think with Maeda, the issue I've got with that is that we haven't done business well enough leading to that point, David, where there's somebody ready to step in who's already at the club.
Exactly.
And that is the recruitment. Yeah.
Somebody is not doing their job properly. Somebody is responsible for what happened to us at the start of the season and not getting into the Champions League. That buck stops at somebody's door. Nobody can argue about that. That should not have happened. And all that crap about UEFA rules and financial stability regulations is just a big smokescreen that's quite frankly taking the piss out of Celtic fans.
What I love about Celtic fans.
Somebody said it was AI generated.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It reads like it is.
Yeah.
It definitely reads that way because it's full of jargon.
Yeah.
They're not talking our language, David. And the thing with Celtic fans, I think, if you've gone through the 90s and you were a massive part of that as well, Celtic fans will stabilise, mobilise, they'll educate themselves in anything they don't understand. So if you're going to throw the UEFA regulations as a reason or an excuse, Celtic fans will go away and research that.
Yeah.
And they'll figure out that it's a nonsense. And what I want to ask you about that is the £100 million, let's say, circa, that is going to be in Celtic's bank the next time we come out with the figures. If we can't spend that, which is claimed on transfers, and we're not going to be spending it redoing the South Stand, the main stand which you and I have spoken about, and they've confirmed in the minutes of their meetings with some of the associations. From a business perspective, what will they do with it? What can they do with all that money? Because when you think about the biggest investors season on season, the biggest investors is fans.
Yeah.
So fans are investing, the money's sitting there.
Yeah.
What are they going to do with that? What's the plan?
Well, the answer is they're doing very little with it. That is the answer. That's sitting in a treasury account earning 2 or 3%. I mean, if the accounts will be out soon, so I think that's where the focus will be. Where is that 100 million or whatever the number is? Is it sitting in a Bank of Scotland account or whatever account? What's it earning? What's it generating? Think what it could be doing if we were actually managing the football side of Celtic, the important side of Celtic properly. If you can do a Dembele for 500,000 and sell him for 20 million, if you can do a Matt O'Reilly, if you can do a Frimpong, why wouldn't you do more of that? Why would you not do more of that? Why would you not bulk up in the whole football department, increase the overhead and generate more cash? But no, it just sort of sits there. And that's years now. And a healthy cash, it's not like this year we've got lots of money and last year we didn't. That's just sitting there doing very, very little. And it makes you wonder what's going on. Yeah,
because if they come out with a plan, and that plan is the infrastructure of the stadium, for example, and they've got big plans, what they've done is they've done up some of the corporate boxes, they've done up the tunnel, and, relatively low cost. And they've got all this money, it's not going to go back into the playing staff. You do wonder. It's not going to go into a hotel now either, apparently, according to the minutes. You were talking there about passing through, right? And I totally agree with you. The only constant is the fan base. Everybody else is passing through. One of the biggest issues back in the day where Fergus McCann had to come in and obviously the old board was ousted, is they weren't passing through. They were digging their heels in, they were staying where they were. It was their birthright in their mind, David.
Yeah.
We now have a boards who are stale. They're not just passing through.
Yeah.
Is that healthy from a company perspective?
No, well, the 90s were the 90s. You know, yeah, the old board weren't for moving, and the world had moved on, and Fergus moved Celtic on, and the board. And you've seen some of the quotes that have been in social media recently about Fergus. You know, it's the fans. He's the guy that made it happen. He put his money in, but so did all the fans. The fans put proportionately more than anybody, more than Fergus put an awful lot of his money in. But, you know, the fans went in hook, line and sinker, plunged in deep and helped create that platform that Fergus and the board created. That was then, but that's 30 years ago. It's a whole new environment now. And that stadium, Celtic Park, is old, and it's not fit compared to a lot of the other stadiums I go to across sports. Even Hampden down the road, which is a horrible stadium, but it's got really good fat cat facilities. But if you're in the stands, it's terrible. So you've got to keep reinvesting in your stadium. This is a perennial problem for football clubs way back to the formation of Celtic and other clubs. You know, you try and put all your money on the park, and you try and put as little as possible into the fabric because you want to put it on the park. Obviously not in the Celtic's instance now, you know, but that is the default position. You try and put all your money on the park, and over time, the stadium in which you play your football tends to degrade, same way your house would degrade if you didn't do it up if you didn't keep investing in it. So that's the history of all of football clubs and football leagues, and it's why Italia, the Italian football in the 80s went out of fashion, because they were basically playing out of Olympic athletic stadiums that didn't get refurbed, didn't get rebuilt, and the market moved on, players moved on, and crowds went away down. Our stadium really needs a lot of capex. I think they're scared to touch the South Stand because it's got grandfather rights, and you could be opening up a Pandora's box. So I don't think refurbing is as easy as it sounds, because if you start dismantling and then you get the planning consents necessary to do what you want to do, you might end up having to tear the whole thing down, and it might end up having to cost a lot more than you originally envisaged. So I can get that, but you should still be doing something about it. And the same with the other new stands, the 30-year-old stands. It really needs investment in it. And you're right, where's the museum, and where's the hotel, and where's the revenues that you could generate from that? Because remember, if that 100 million, you don't have to put 50 million in and increase the squad and get close to the FSR ceilings. You can actually invest that money in the fabric of the club, you know, whereby the club generates additional revenues, and that means your ceiling goes up with the additional revenues. So because the board doesn't really tell you that much, you don't really know what they're thinking because they don't say anything. So you're left to sort of just use your common sense. So
talking about
maybe we'll find out soon.
Yes, well, it would be great to hear something, David, but that's escalated in the last week or so. There was a lot of frustration building. You and I have spoken about it for months. In fact, every time you've been on a Celtic State of Mind, there's been big issues with the board, be that the stadium, the ownership. You were concerned during one of our conversations about, you know, other owners coming in, how that might actually affect this football club that we all love and we were born into. In terms of the makeup of how Celtic is run and who owns Celtic and who controls Celtic, that's been put under the spotlight recently because of the open letter by all these fan groups. It's now close to 500 fan groups voting no confidence in people like Michael Nicholson and Peter Lawwell. But Celtic fans look at Celtic and think, well, we can't really do anything about Dermot Desmond. He is the immovable object. How did he manage to get so much domination or influence at Celtic?
Well, what he is the largest shareholder, but the smallest shareholder has the same legal rights as the biggest shareholder. And the smallest shareholder, or the smaller shareholders, the fans that went for the minimum allocation in 1995, have as much legal rights as any shareholder on that Celtic board, including a Dermot Desmond. And the way that he got to have it's called a dominant position. It's not a controlling position, and he's not the owner. He has what's called a dominant position, as defined by a thing called the QCA, the Quoted Company Alliance, which is something that Celtic have adopted, being a name stock, a company that's quoted on the stock exchange. So Dermot is defined as a dominant shareholder. So when he came in 1995, when he appeared in 1995, he bought, I think he bought 4 or 5 million, I can't remember the exact number, and that gave him a biggish stake. But Fergus was still in control with his 51%, and I think it was 14,000 fans and bought shares, can't remember the exact number. But there was no domination. It was a equilibrium relationship between big fans, big shareholders and small shareholder. But that made, and Dermot genuinely was, back in those days, an NED with Brian Quinn and with Sir Patrick Sheehy and a couple of others I can't remember. And, they were heavyweights, and Fergus didn't get his way in a whole lot of things because the NEDs were doing the job they were brought in to do. But after when Fergus left and he offered his half of the shares to the other half, the ordinary fans, Dermot got his allocation and all the other fans were offered theirs. But because the fans had put in so much, each successive share issue had a smaller and smaller uptake from the ordinary fan. So that allowed the people, the big guys, to take up their entitlement. So their percentage went up. But the real change, hope this isn't too boring, the real change happened between 2001 and 2005. There was 2 very opportunistic share issues. Opportunistic really means deep discount, cheap shares issues, whereby that generation of fans facing their 4th and 5th share issue in 10 years had put in less and less and less, but the fat cats put in more and more and more. So the fat cats percentage goes up and up and up. But Dermot's still not at a dominant shareholder status. That happens in 2005, the last one, where his shareholding goes over 29.9. He gets a whitewash from the takeover panel, and that gave him the percentage that he has. So he got that, to answer your question, over 4 share issues. Fergus was away, and again, all the NEDs that were around in the 90s, they're all away, and they've been replaced by, I'll use the word for comparative purposes, lightweights, as opposed to heavyweights. Because I don't really see anybody on that board saying boo to Dermot's goose. And I don't really believe that Dermot Desmond's an NED anymore. He's what you call the shot caller. He decides, he makes the big decisions. How many times have you heard the manager saying, well, I'm going over to see Dermot. I'm going over with Peter. I'm going over with Mike.
It's normalised, isn't it?
Well, what's an NED doing there? Well, the NED's calling the shots. What's the dominant shareholder doing there that calls himself an NED? He's calling the shots. So, that is what it is. And it feels great when you're scalping the Rangers and you're winning quadruple trebles. But you also got to look, and my measure of Celtic's not the domestic league. Somebody my age is used to doing things in Europe, and we get ritually humiliated now in Europe. A few wee exceptions over the century, but by and large it's a story of humiliation, which is very hard to stomach if you're of a certain age. Younger people might think this is what happens all the time, but if you're in your 50s or 60s, you're used to competing decently in Europe. But what's happened, if you think about Celtic this century, is there has been no real domestic competition at all. Rangers have been in absolute chaos for the whole duration. David Murray gave up the ghost in the early noughties. He was in and out of the chairmanship. He had that big guy, Bob, forgotten his name, as the chairman. And then he was trying to punt it for £1 for years. And then we had the financial crash, which really ruined them. They lost their special status with the Bank of Scotland, which was taken over, I think, by Lloyd's TSB. So that special relationship was fractured. The sweetheart, easy deals were gone. And they've been a mess ever since. 4 years later, they get liquidated. I've been trying to punt it on to, what's his name, Craig White. So, and then they're out the league for 4 seasons, was it? I think they stayed in the championship for a couple. So we have no competition. We've got nobody to spar with. Then, since they come back, they've been fighting amongst themselves. You've had your Dave Kings, you've had your Craig White, not Craig White, so you've had your Mike Ashley's, you've had your Easdales, you've had Charlie Green, you've had different factions and combinations there, and living hand to mouth. They've been a mess, an absolute shambles. And I'm afraid it's true to say it's really been easy. I think the Rangers' chaos has papered over a whole lot of serious cracks, and we're beginning to see those cracks. If you want to use a euphemism.
If we're looking at a board of directors who use that success, David, to say, what are you moaning about?
Well, that's what they do. I'll tell you what we're moaning about: getting humiliated in Europe, not spending money on players, and it's just not acceptable. And it's no surprise that the fans are up in arms because they care.
This is it. I mean, this is what a lot of people that I've spoken to in the last couple of weeks, David, who don't have any skin in the Celtic game, who might be working for a broadcaster somewhere, don't really get it. And I don't blame them, because as you say, look at all the trophies that you guys have won. You win every season, but they don't know how nuanced that is. The first thing that you mentioned there is the fact that in terms of competition, Rangers have been a basket case in both, both their different guises. But they still use that in terms of, look, we're good, we're well run, and you're getting all this success on the park. There's been an uprising. And when I use what happened in the 90s to today, I totally appreciate 2 completely different situations in terms of the board that was in charge of Celtic, the Fergus McCann's takeover compared to now. But what I would say is similar is that the ability of Celtic fans to come together, to be a group, a movement, a collective, and I think we've seen that last week. As you've mentioned there, the club came back with a statement, and the fan groups are going again. But the last time I spoke to your pal and business associate Duncan Smiley, we were talking about this untraced 20%, up to, let's say, 20% of shares, that if they were to be traced and managed properly, or if there was a shareholder group who would be able to take them under their wing in terms of a proxy, then you become very, very influential then. And then the normal fan then has a voice. Yeah.
Look, the ownership structure is not going to change unless Dermot Desmond wants it to change. You can't force somebody to sell. If he wants to stay, he'll stay. If he doesn't want to stay, he'll sell. So my concern, well, I've been around the block. Everything that walks this earth has a price. Everything's for sale if the price is right. Don't care what anybody says. I'm leaving it to my kids, my grandkids. I've heard that all over the place. Heard David Murray say it in the 90s, leaving it to the boys. The boys don't want it. I've heard Eddie, what's his name, Eddie Thompson, Dundee United. The boys rather have the money. It's everything that walks this earth has a price. And I've told the stories about the Irish farmer. I'm not doing that again. And again, back in the 90s, everybody bought these shares for like 60 pence. And it's going in a frame, it's going on the wall, and it'll be there forever. And then 2 years later, they're a fiver. Get that off the wall. It went from 60 to a fiver, and something that cost 500 quid was worth $3,000. Shares were getting sold. Everything has a price. So it would be folly to just say, oh, he'll never sell. I'm not picking a Dermot Desmond. I'm just saying that's just human nature. He is a stockbroker after all. So my concern has always been, and always has been, who owns Celtic. I want to know what's happening in the next 20 years. I don't know what's happening. I'm not really that interested in what's happening next season. Well, I'm interested, but it matters to me and a lot of people about who owns Celtic. I don't want them to be a plaything like the Glazers at United or Abu Dhabi or whoever owns Newcastle. It's important that we have the right ownership if we can get it, and it's important that there's balance. That balance that Fergus McCann's board had between the corporate interests and the fans. So, which has been lost by those share issues I was talking about. But it's still possible if all the small shareholders have a vehicle whereby they can aggregate, consolidate, and vote as a block, if you like, the same way as or in a similar way that the supporters are doing with their dissent. It's also very easy to get untraced dead votes and shares reactivated if you catch it early enough. This is a problem that's common to all sporting institutions, particularly football clubs. Untraced shares. Most companies that are listed in the stock exchange have an average of 5% of untraced shares. That's just people dying, somebody forgetting to tell the company or the company registrars, or you're moving house and you've got more important things to think about a bit than telling somebody where your shares are registered. But with football clubs, it's different, because with football clubs, the fans that have bought shares haven't bought them like as an investment, really. They've bought them in order to feel part of the club, ownership of the club. And they're usually not familiar with the protocols associated with owning shares. Especially when they've bought them off the page. Back in the 90s, you remember, no internet, no online banking, none of that, and a lot less regulations. All you had to do was to fill in a form like you were buying any old thing, and send it off with a check and a staple in an envelope, or hand it into Celtic Park, and that was it. Then you get a share certificate in a tube back, and you put it in a drawer, you put it in a frame. But that was 30 years ago. And think how many times people move in that period. You relocate, or you get married, or somebody dies, and you're not familiar with how you keep those shares active, alive. It has a cumulative effect. Or even dividends. You know, if you don't tell a club where you live the dividend check is uncashed, and if there's 2 uncashed dividend checks in a row, they stop sending out the accounts, they stop sending out the proxy voting forms. And in all football clubs, this is what happens. It allowed the old Celtic board back in the day to maintain control from a minority position. And they had what used to be called, in my words, a Warsaw Pact, a non-aggression pact, whereby 3 families that didn't like each other knew that if they kept together, non-aggression pact, they had control, and then they would do turnabout, you can be chairman, and then after you're gone, I'll be chairman. You know, this went on for like 40 or 50 years. And they were able to do this because, you know, all the tenements were knocked down and people moved to Castlemilk, Easter House, wherever. And it's common at Albion Rovers just now, whereby half the share register's deed and missing. So Celtic's not different in that respect. Where it is different, though, is the numbers. We've probably got more shareholders than any other football club, maybe even in the world. So the problem that I've just referenced there is bigger at Celtic. It's huge, and I estimate that it's like 20%.
Yeah.
And I did a sort of algorithmic calculation, you know, like 5 years ago to come up with that figure. And I think it's genuine. And if you think what that means, and that's only in 25 years, 30 years, think what it'll be like in another 20 years. That number only ever goes up. It means that if you're actually playing the game, you actually know the protocols, you actually tell people when you're moving house, you actually pass them off onto your son or your daughter. That means that if 20% is missing just now, that means, just to use Dermot as the big shareholder, if he's got 40% just now, that's 40% of 100%. But if 20% is missing, that 40% is 50% of 80%. Not to use too many percentages. Yeah. But, you know, that number goes up and up and up. Yeah, I basically think he's probably got, if there was a vote tomorrow to sell the club, for example, you know, he could probably deliver 51%, you know, on that basis of 20, if 20% is missing. So this has always been an area that I've focused on, because I do care about who owns Celtic, and so do lots of other people. And, you know, we took this to the board, you know, back when I was involved with the Celtic Trust, briefly for a year, 2020-ish. And, you know, they helped of a fashion, you know, and you can go onto the website and there's some instructions, but it should really be center page, dedicated person, that fans can go to. And that person's job at Celtic is to basically reactivate dead shares, because it's quite easy to do if you know what you're doing. I've already sort of privately activated, probably about 400,000 or 500,000.
Right.
But it's a pain in the ass. And when I say I've done it, somebody that works for me's done it. So people come to you and get shares activated. Somebody came at that Celtic Trust meeting last week saying, "Now I've got 31 dividends I've missed here. How do I get that sorted?" So American private equity is all over. Just to finish off this ownership point, is all over Europe. There's, what's a better deal? Buying the Lakers at 10 million, or the most recent one, the New York Giants, with a value in excess of 10 billion, did I say million? 10 billion, or you can buy like the Glasgow Rangers for like $100 million. What's the better deal? Or Derby County, if you get the deal right, you can make money out of franchises. I mean, if Celtic were to get sold, Dermot Desmond would make money. So would everybody else, right enough, just to be clear about that. So how many clubs are owned by Americans in the Scottish Football League? The Premier League, you get Rangers. You've got the two Dundee teams. Aberdeen's technically American money, is oil money. Half of the Premiership in England is American money. Half of the Championship in England is American money. And it's because they basically think, sports franchises are cheap in Europe.
Yeah.
But it's also very easy to lose money in football. Very easy indeed if you're not careful. And a lot of these people will lose money. The smart guys are looking at big fish and small ponds. Because if you buy a Benfica, an Ajax, a Rangers, or a Celtic, number one, you ain't getting relegated. So that risk is gone. Number two, in Scotland anyway, you've got a license to play in Europe. How far you get is another issue. But you get a license to play in Europe. And in Scotland, you've got a, euphemistically, 50% chance of playing in the getting into the Champions League qualifying rounds. I actually think it's a license to get knocked out, but that's another matter. So I get the attraction of the small fish, sort of big fish in small ponds. There's more value for money there than is in buying a Derby County or a Carlisle United or whatever. So Rangers, this is another interesting development, I think, if you're looking ahead. Rangers now remind me of Celtic in the 90s. So what do I mean by that? This is the first time this century that Rangers have had stability. Stability equals a controlling shareholder. They've never had that since Murray headed for the exit door, the noughties. So number one characteristic required for a successful football team is unity, control, stability, and access to money. And these Americans have brought that to Rangers. No more infighting now. You get stability, controlling shareholder, and access to money. The problem will be for Rangers, the same as it was for Celtic. They want success now, and it doesn't work like that, because there was so much wrong at Celtic in the 90s, and there's so much wrong in Rangers now that, it'll take time to get everything sorted. It may be like another 5-year project like Fergus had.
Yeah.
But, the Rangers that we have been ritually humiliating, for most of this century, I think that's going to become more difficult now. Or put another way, I think we're going to get some decent opposition, whether the Martin fellow is the director or not. And that's a game changer for Celtic, because really, it is true to say, they've not really been at the races for most of the century. And we have flattered to deceive. So, it's a time for stepping up. I get that. It's a time for reinvesting. It's not a time for care and maintenance and think it's just going to continue as it's been. It's a time for, Rodgers is right. You've got to invest in the squad.
You do. You mentioned the situation at Rangers and being proactive in that respect, David. Even in the statement that came out on Saturday the past, there was reference to other football clubs who don't manage themselves properly. It was almost a dig. And the Celtic board have done that in the past, as if we're going to cut a cheap shot. We're going to cut
why you
some
stick
favour.
that in your press release? Because the fans will love it.
Yeah.
Or the wee dig at the I'll say that. Rangers, a wee dig at the Rangers, you know. Everybody loves a dig at the Rangers.
Yeah.
But it's cheap.
And I think also it shows you a bit of their mindset, whereby they're still obsessed with just being that one step ahead of Rangers, which again is a maintenance and care package that we're getting there. Following the AGM last week of the Celtic Trust, what's your plans in relation to the shares or gathering of shares, David? What do you think's the best way forward?
Myself and others have been talking about, you know, look, we should really have a vehicle for doing these things, consolidating, aggregating, activating untraced shares, buying shares. And, you know, back in 2020, I thought that could be the Celtic Trust, but there's too many problems in there and I was too busy. But we did get it up from, it was 200 members when I joined and there was over 2,000 when I left. And the 2,000, and all the cash flow that 2,000 generated allowed the trust, or I did the deals on behalf of the trust. Some of them are sensitive about how it's described, to get them their 170,000 shares. And more members equals more shares. Mm-hmm. But, and I thought, well, if we're going to, or we thought, if we were going to form this new company for doing these things, why don't we use the trust? Because they've got 2,000 members and they've got 170,000 shares. Let's join and then you've got all the competing interests and there's governance issues there. And we just thought on the spot in the room there and then, nah, this ain't going to work. So we decided to withdraw our nominations, go back to the original plan of forming a new company limited by guarantee. That's a non-profit making thing. Nobody's making any money, and that'll be launched in a few weeks. We need to finish off the website, but we've incorporated it, and that will be going live, and that will be the host for what we're talking about. And the object will be to basically create a shareholding block by aggregating all the shares together, buying shares with the cash flow from the memberships and sponsorships and donations, etc. And also employing somebody to be responsible for the activation of, reactivation of untraced shares. So I'd say we've already got pushing 1 million shares in that grouping, which has to be formalized. And I think we could get up to 5 million pretty quickly. You know, and these are big numbers.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And you know, the 20%.
And the object, by the way, is not revolution, it's balance.
Yeah.
You know, this is not an aggressive act. This is trying to restore the balance that existed when McCann was there and when I was there. You had this balance between the committee, which has been lost. So the object is to recreate the balance and to work with the club, not to work against the club. And it's actually doing the job that the non-executive directors are not doing. You want to point the finger at anybody, you point your finger at these non-executive directors that have long outlived their stay and should be replaced by somebody else.
Yeah, and on that note, that's what allows someone to be such an influence at a football club if they're not challenged, David. And this, again, a light has been shone on this over the last week or so.
Yeah.
So what we have is we have a fan movement, as yet unnamed, and there's not a spearhead. It's a coming together of all these fan groups. And we've got yourselves, and I look forward to seeing that being launched. And you've got a clear vision of what it is you're doing. But these things can work in tandem. They can go along their own paths. And I think from both perspectives, it's to get the best from what Celtic can potentially achieve. When you look at the club's response to the open letter, the fact that the open letter signatories are going to be meeting this week to talk about next steps, actions, objectives, and put yourself in that boardroom, David. How are they going to react? Because I've been saying all week, they probably can't think themselves. They're going to have to get someone from outside to come in and say, this is how you're going to manage this. How do you think the Celtic board will act? Will anybody be held to account for the lack of transfer activity, the lack of Champions League football, and the fact that the fans have created this movement?
Right, okay, so it will be very uncomfortable being a Celtic director if you're living in Scotland and you're going to games and you're in that box and you're in the car park and you're walking into the ground. It's not nice. I mean, we've all got exaggerated views and it can become very unpleasant, and that's not to be tolerated. But people do have strong feelings, and you should be aware of this when you agree to be a director, that it's not all plain sailing and that you're going to get criticised if things aren't going right. And I think we're in that zone and it can become nasty, and I don't condone any of that. They'll be feeling uncomfortable. I'm hearing from inside the building that this time it's different.
Yeah.
This is not going to have a cooling off period. We're going to go back to some sort of normality with 3 wins, you know, in the league. There's a feeling that we're not in that zone anymore. So usually a casualty, Peter Lawwell was a casualty of sorts when we lost the 10. But again, the way it works is you wait a decent amount of time before you make the change, so it doesn't look like you're being forced to make the change yourself. So I'm pretty sure there will be some changes. There will be a casualty and there will be a scapegoat. Could be the chief executive, could be a couple of non-executive departures. Bankier left as well, you know, when there was the hassle. But it's not comfortable. I don't know what they'll be saying behind closed doors, you know, ungrateful bastards or something.
Well, this is it. Yeah, count the trophies. I always talk about culture in business and at our football club. My concern, even if there are casualties, David, is that people will be put in the positions who will just fit right into place and continue, you know, what we've already experienced, because there is one person who might not have a controlling share, but they are the dominant force. Is that a fear that you've got?
Yeah. You know, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, to quote Shakespeare. Was it Shakespeare? Yeah. If you look at the amount of chief executives we've had, you know, if you look at the amount of managers we've had, if you look at the amount of chairmen we've had, or, you know, there's no continuity other than the fact that we've got Dermot Desmond as the dominant shareholder. You know, there's not a lot to suggest they won't just be replaced by similar types. I don't know. All I know is that it's important that balance is restored between the corporate ownership and the fans that go to games, the fans that provide all the money to pay all these directors' fees, etc. That's important. It's also even more important to have a say in who owns this club in the future. Should somebody come along and bid, you know, £5 a share for Celtic because it's the biggest fish in the pond and it's got this diaspora and it's got all the Irish heritage, etc. It's a very attractive proposition for these American private equity types to be such a fish in such a pond. So at the end of the day, 25% is the magic number, because you need special resolutions to pass all your resolutions to get complete control. This is what happened at Rangers. 4 guys out of 14,000 shareholders sold to a bunch of anonymous Americans. Nobody knows who owns Rangers controlling interest other than the 49er Enterprises and the Kavanagh fellow, but there's 10 other investors, which I can probably find out, but I can't be bothered. You know, you want to know who's running your club, who's owning your club, who's calling the shots. And I think Rangers fans had no say in that again, because those 4 guys that sold out, all the other shareholders didn't get that offer. And then they put the special resolution through. Remember, Rangers fans have lost their AIM status, you know, so they've got Diddy shares. They've then lost their rights as minority shareholders because they're now stuck in a private limited company controlled by and others. So they might not care about that if suddenly they're top dog again. Maybe, you know, maybe they don't care if Rangers are now winning league titles or are doing something. But I don't want that to happen to Celtic. I don't want to wake up one morning and find that, you know, we're owned by somebody that we didn't have a say in. So it's important that we have a say, and that's another reason why it's important that the fans that own shares rally round, you know, an entity. And this will be a democratic entity. If it kicks off being with me, Duncan and Peter, you know, being the director, that quite frankly, I don't give a shit who's on the board as long as they share the same sentiments, you know. And I don't have time for this, but Duncan, semi-retired, if I may say so, you know, has got more time for this, and he'll probably front all this. But it is important to have a say in the future direction of your club. And that's where my focus is. So it's quite distinct from, you know, trying to directly implement or affect, you know, the way the football club is run in terms of the manager, the players, the budget. We can't really directly influence that. We can complain about it, which is what's happening just now. But it really takes the board or Dermot Desmond to say, right, yeah, you know, I've got a point here. We'll not tell them that though, but, you know, we can't go on like this. Rangers are now a threat. You know, we've got to start using that money. You know, you'd like to think there's some sort of a conversation like that taking place, a change in attitude, move away from this care and maintenance, steady as she goes, way that it's clearly been run. We have this, you asked me this time last year, you think they'll spend the money? I remember when I did one of these before, and they went and bought whoever they bought, you know, they might have Yota or Ida, whoever it was at the time, but they didn't even do that this year. You know, it's quite outrageous when you think about it.
It felt
Is it any wonder everybody's pissed off?
It just felt as though it was going back to Brendan's first transfer window, David. We were looking for all the punts in a certain market, up to 5 million maximum, and don't push the boat out. And I get that there's parameters set by the club, and the recruitment team are going to be finding that really, really difficult. How did you feel about the deals? Again, this was something the club covered in their statement. The fact we couldn't get deals done, we're lowballing teams, their directors are coming out and laughing at us, and then we're making the signings too late, and then blaming everybody else. Surely a club like Celtic should be doing this all year round, David, and then when the window opens, you push the button.
It's the integral part of running a football club in this day and age. That £100 million, well, we're calling it 100 million, it's actually 70, but we'll probably be higher, so we'll just stick with 100. That's basically been generated by key transfer fees over the years. And basically it also means that it's not getting reinvested. This doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. If you're successful on, you know, get some right, get some wrong, but if you get more right than wrong and you've built up that cash balance, why wouldn't you do more of it? I would actually have a £50 million share issue for this generation. There's not been a share issue since 2005. That whole, everybody shared out, you know, is a generation back. That's pertinent to the 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds. There's a whole generation that are probably doing all the complaining just now about what's going on at the club that have no shares. You know, we could easily have a share issue to raise £50 million, invest it in this transfer market and in the fabric of the ground. That's another thing that, you know, was probably not going to happen. And to build that museum and to build that hotel and to generate all these off-field revenue streams so that you're not just relying on 30 home games a season. There's another 335 days in the year that ain't earning. So, you know, we should be looking at that. But again, we are running a care and maintenance safely as she goes basis. Take no risks, no surprises. You know, that's the way it is. And it's not working.
Not much in the last week's been spoken about on the football side, David. How does this affect Brendan Rodgers? Does he knuckle down? Is he able to maximise his influence on the squad he's got and make it a successful season on the park, do you think?
I don't believe from past experience you can hide this. You don't actually realise it's affecting you. It's, you know, psychological, but if there's a bad vibe or a bad vein, you know, running through the club, into the manager, onto the training ground. I mean, we'd made it last season, have hit that ball out over the bar with 10 minutes to go. You know, none of us are sure he would have.
I know.
Good pitch or not. So I think it's difficult to shelter negativity on the training ground, whether you realise it or not. It affected us in the COVID year, and it's in danger of infecting us now. I have every sympathy, you know what, for Brendan Rodgers, and I would hate to see him getting flack for the situation that we find ourselves in. The buck for the problems we've got is in the boardroom. He's been left hung out to dry. What's he supposed to say? If you don't even get 3 men and a donkey, you know, in the transfer window, you know, it's made it very difficult. And I think he's been very diplomatic.
And like the COVID season, it's the gaffer that's the guy that's front and centre, David. Nobody from the club comes out and explains their action or inaction. It's interesting over the piece that you actually called this. You said you were concerned the last time I spoke to you actually about this season. So we'll see how it pans out. But I'm looking forward to seeing the developments with the group that you're assembling. And hopefully you can come back and it'll be a wee bit more positive next time, David.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot of positivity about it, so we'll see how it goes.
Thanks for joining us again.
No probs.
Thank you. Thanks again for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind. Join us next week at 6 o'clock on Friday night for This is Acsom.